In 1987, a snake made international headlines, not because it attacked anyone, not because it was the biggest ever found, but because an entire community mourned it like a mother, a queen, even a god. Tourists flew in from America and Britain just to see her. When she died, condolence books were opened, funds were raised for her burial. A sitting member of parliament stood in government offices and demanded her body be brought home. Her name was Omieri, and to this day, more than 3 decades later, her preserved body still causes arguments between a community and a national government. This is the full story: her mysterious appearance, her strange life among humans, her tragic death, and the decades-long fight for over where her remains should be finally rested. Before we get into Omieri's story, you need to understand the worlds where she was born into, culturally and not literally. In Nyakach, a sub-county in Kisumu County in Nyanza, Kenya, home to the Luo community, pythons were not seen as ordinary predators. They were traditionally valued as bearers of good luck. The appearance of a python was believed to signal that the doors of heavens would open, bringing rain, and with rain, a bountiful harvest. This matters enormously because Nyakach, like much of the Nyanza province, depended on rains for survival. Agriculture was life. So when local mythology tied a giant snake to rainfall and prosperity, that wasn't just superstition for its own sake. It was tied directly to whether families ate that year. The community believed Omieri's presence was linked to good fortune and that her appearance would open heavens, bringing rain. She was closely associated with the bountiful harvest. Children were reportedly given the task of massaging her, a sign of how deeply she'd been folded into the rhythms of daily village life. Now, here is where the story gets its name and its strangeness. In the quiet village of Paponditi in Nyakach sub-county, Kisumu County, there once lived a man named Omieri, not a snake, a man, a real human being with that name. Shortly after this man died, an enormous python, measuring around 5.3 meters, weighing close to 74 kilograms by some accounts, was sighted brooding over her eggs near his homestead. This is the moment the legend was born. The villagers began to talk. A man had died almost immediately. A massive, unusual python had appeared at his home, nesting, guarding eggs, seemingly unafraid of humans around her. The people of Paponditi, this wasn't a coincidence. This was a reincarnation. They began speculating that the man had returned in serpent form, and so they named the python after him, Omieri. Think about what that means. From her very first appearance in recorded memory, this snake wasn't just an animal to the people of Nyakach. She was a person, a former neighbor, a returned ancestor. Given the community's existing beliefs, her arrival was met with open arms and celebration rather than fear. The villagers took turns feeding her. Different retelling put her length and weight slightly different. Some sources describe her as roughly 5.3 meters and 58 kilograms. Others describe her closely to 16 feet at the time of her death. Whatever the precise figure, the consistent thread is this: she was enormous, and she was treated less like wildlife and more like a martyr.
Twaka Omieri kaka chwech mahono
For years, accounts vary on the exact length of her life, since no one was tracking a wild python's birth certificate. Mary lived in and around the homes of Nyakach villagers. She wasn't caged. She wasn't a captive attraction. She moved between homestead, and the community responded not with panic, but with reverence. She became something like a cultural fixture, described by scholar James Howard Smith as a python that appears at times of great portent for the Luo people. One especially vivid chapter of her life involved a woman who came to be known as Mama Omieri. This woman hosted the snake at her home for 163 days. During that time, Omieri hatched 77 snakelets. Though 2 of them died, Mama Omieri fed the great serpent with rat, fish, and chicken, some of it supplied by the Kenya Wildlife Services once they became aware of the situation. Every day around 10 a.m., Omieri and her young would come out bask together in the sun, a daily ritual that drew crowds. And the crowds were massive. Words of the python spread well beyond Nyanza. Mama Omieri eventually became so overwhelmed by the endless stream of visitors that she locked herself inside her house just to get a break from the crowds gathering outside. Eventually, the Kenya Wildlife Services caught wind of what was happening and stepped in. But not everyone saw Omieri as a blessing. Some people praised Mama Omieri for hosting the python, while others wanted the snake killed, accusing the household of practicing witchcraft. Similarly, a local Anglican bishop pushed back hard against the community's reverence for the snake. He believed the python was effectively being worshipped and pointed to the biblical portrayal of snakes as demonic figures, arguing that the one true God transcended local, culturally specific belief like this one. He faced serious resistance from villagers for saying so. So, even at the height of her fame, Omieri was a dividing line between traditional Luo belief and outside religious and skeptical viewpoints. She was at once a beloved local deity figure and a national curiosity, and to some, a source of real controversy. Her fame grew large enough that an MP treated her as a star attraction, and when words reached America and Britain, tourists actually traveled to Kenya specifically to see her and take photographs. It's worth pausing here to appreciate how unusual this is. This isn't a story about a snake in a zoo enclosure people paid to see. This is a wild African rock python that effectively became a celebrity with a nickname for the woman who cared for her, a daily public sunbathing routine, international tourists, and a religious controversy swirling around her.
Kuja kujenga hapa hapo pia alikuja tena.
Every legend has a turning point. For Omieri, it came in early 1987. There are 2 overlapping explanations for how the fire started, and both appear in different accounts of the story. They aren't necessarily contradictory, since crowds of tourists and curious locals were both converging on her at this point. One version, as time passed, the awe surrounding Omieri bred doubts, and doubt turned into hostility. People had watched the terrifying way she had devoured sacrificial animals, wrapping around her prey, crushing bones, squeezing the life out of it before swallowing it all. And some of that fear curdled into resentment. One afternoon, a group of young men took matters into their own hands, arming themselves with a matchbox and fuel, and made their way to the sisal plantation where she had been spotted. They lit a match, and the place went up in flame. Another version reported elsewhere. On February 27, 1987, locals at Paponditi in Nyakach set fire to the area where Omieri lived, hoping the flame would drive her out into open so she could be viewed. But the fire spread far beyond and what everyone intended. and a closely related accounts describe it as local tour guides setting the bush ablaze, specifically to make Omieri emerge for tourists. A plan that spiraled out of control. Whichever motive was the play, fear, spectacle, or both, the outcome was the same. Cries ranged out through the village when people realized what was happening. Omieri suffered devastating burn. The date most commonly cited for the fire is February 27, 1987. Omieri suffered serious burns in the blaze. The Kenya Wildlife Service was called immediately. Officers came alongside staff from the Kisumu Museum and removed the python from the scene. She was taken to the museum for treatment in what several sources placed around April 1987, though one detailed account gives a more precise timeline. She was moved to the Nairobi National Museum for treatment on March 13th, 1987. Then on May 21st, 1987, she was transferred back to the Kisumu Museum in hopes that the more familiar environment would aid her recovery. This back and forth transfer wasn't just bureaucratic. It reflected genuine disagreement about what Omieri needed. Nairobi had better veterinary and scientific resources, but Nyakach resident believed something more specific was required for her healing. Some villagers believed her 3-month stay in Nairobi actually contributed to her deadline, pointing to the change in climate and crucial and her inability to drink from the river Awaso and Oduro stream, both believed locally to have healing properties. Meanwhile, in captivity, new complication emerged that nothing to do with the burns directly. At the museum, Kisumu, Mary was fed chicken, but she eventually developed an oral infection that left her unable to eat. She was quarantined for closer observation, but a fungal infection took hold, leading to mouth rot. A condition experts note is common in snake held captive for extended periods. So by mid-1987, Omieri was fighting on 3 fronts simultaneously: severe burn injuries, gastrointestinal problem, and a spreading fungal mouth infection. It was a combination no amount of reverence could reverse.
It was corrected after being discovered and taken to Kisumu Museum. Fortunately, in 9th July 1987, the animal died.
Despite the efforts of the Wildlife Service to save her and the severity of her injuries leading to further complication, Omieri died on July 9, 1987. For years afterwards, the exact cause of her death was debated. Was it the burns, the infection, something spiritual? As many villagers believed, eventually science gave something close to an answer. An autopsy revealed that Omieri died of a gastrointestinal tract blockage caused by a ring of roundworms. Internal injuries from the 3rd-degree burns she suffered in the fire, along with her rotting mouth, likely also contributed to her death. A separate summary of the same autopsy described the cause more simply as a gastrointestinal tract infection. In plain terms, the fire started a cascade of injuries and infection that her body simply couldn't recover from, compounded by an internal parasite blockage that on its own might already have been fatal. The reaction in Nyakach was immediate and profound. Omieri's death left the region in a deep somber mood. Villagers held a 3-day mourning ceremony for her, the kind of ritual typically reserved for the loss of an important person, not an animal. Condolence books were opened for messages of sympathy, and the community even raised funds towards her burial, treating her passing the way they will treat the death of a matriarch. And then, almost immediately, nature seemed to answer with a strange twist of timing. Heavy rains fell for days shortly after Omieri's death and departure from the area. Rains so severe They swept away homes and destroyed property. Many villagers interpreted this as a direct consequence of her death or her remains being taken away from the community. To a community that has spent years associating with this snake with rainfall and fortune, this wasn't a coincidence. It was confirmation, and it set the stage for a political and cultural battle that remarkably is still playing out today. Upon her death, Ojwang Kombudu, the member of parliament representing Nyakach, formally demanded that the government return Omieri's remains to the area rather than keeping them in Nairobi. He believed her absence was directly responsible for the season's harvest failure. Let that sink in. A member of Kenya's national parliament stood up and argued on the record that a dead snake needed to come home or the crop wouldn't mail. That's the level of cultural weight Omieri carried. So, after death, what actually happened to her body? This is where the story becomes as much about museums, preservation science, and government decision making as it is about folklore. Omieri's body has been preserved at the Nairobi National Museum, more specifically late reporting places at a related facility, the Nairobi Snake Park, part of the National Museum of Kenya complex, where she had been preserved since shortly after she has been the first time she was captured public attention. She captured public attention in 1987. How exactly do you preserve a nearly 5.5 meter python for over 3 decades? Not through taxidermy in the traditional sense, but through wet preservation. Mary's body rests inside a transparent cubic glass tank filled with industrial methylated alcohol up to roughly 3/4 of the tank's height, resting on a pedestal about a meter off the ground. This is a fairly standard museum preservation technique for a large specimen, full body submersion in a preserving alcohol solution inside sealed glass and slow decomposition, and keeps the specimen viewable for the public indefinitely, providing conditions are carefully maintained. That's the story of Omieri, the python who was mourned like a royalty, preserved like a scientific specimen, and is still to this day at the center of a debate about where she truly belongs. If you enjoyed this deep dive, let me know in the comment section. Should Omieri's remains be permanently returned to Nyakach, or does Nairobi Museum remain the right place for her? Subscribe for more stories like this one, and I'll see you in the next video.